Hi, welcome to session 3, and we take a look at an overview of equity focused and gender responsive or gender sensitive evaluation. And in this session, we shall focus on equity. We look at what it is, why it matters, and then how why equity focused evaluation is important, but also, of course, what it is. Excuse me. And then we look at gender and why it matters, and then we look at gender sensitive evaluation and why integration of gender in evaluation is important. So let's begin with equity. So just as Bamberg and Sigun 2011 say that all individuals have opportunities to live, develop, and reach their full potential without discrimination, bias, or favoritism. Of course, this relates to what Amartya Sen talks about when he looks at development, when he defines development as freedom, and therefore that of course he says this in relation to what he conceptualizes as capabilities and functionings. So that people should be free or have a choice to live the life they value and yeah choose to become who they want to become in that case. So just the same as that, if we are talking about interventions or any development processes, then therefore individuals should have opportunities to fully participate and benefit from interventions without any discrimination or bias or favoritism, whether during implementation or whether during evaluation of those interventions. So therefore there must be prioritization of WAS of groups. The WAS of groups could be the marginalized or the poor, or you can name them as vulnerable groups, which of course in most cases are women, children, or the poor, and other categories, of course, as we shall see. So in any kind of development process or evaluation processes, so there must be some kind of prioritization of those WAS of groups with a name of addressing the inequalities. So of course the social contexts, not biological factors, result in unfair or unjust experiences, and therefore these can lead to inequalities and iniquities. Basically, of course, it's not whether one is born female or male, but it's about how society categorizes particular groups to be women or men or boys and girls and other categories, of course, including disabled and so on. So the inequalities and iniquities are the results of how society perceives or expects certain groups to behave or act. So, but of course, iniquities are a complex and contextual issue in that case. Complex because there are so many variables or factors that relate to the causation of such iniquities, but also again they are contextual because how they are valued or perceived in one society is different from other societies. So equity focused interventions or evaluation should aim at, of course, not eliminating differences. Should focus on not to eliminate differences among groups, which relates to elimination of inequalities, or rather aiming at achieving equality, but should focus on eliminating unfair or unjust and avoidable circumstances that deprive certain groups of their rights, and that leads us to the equity focused evaluation that we are talking about. Yeah, so here is one illustration which is commonly referred to, just to give us a picture of what we mean by equality versus inequality, or I mean equality versus equity. So if we are saying that intervention should not just aim at achieving equality, but rather looking at addressing unfairness or injustice, then why are the two different? So you have our intervention here down, the representative of these boxes you see down there, and then you have the outcome, and of course the outcome is that everyone should be able to watch the game. So if the intervention in under equality is so in this case the depiction of equality is that everyone gets an opportunity to participate, or is given the same support, so that they can be able to watch the game, because that's the idea, that everyone wants to watch the game. But under equality, the outcome is different if you factor in the different characteristics of individuals who are participating in trying to watch the game. Yeah, so the outcome under equality is that while all have received support equally, the outcome would not be equal in that case, because of the characteristics of this one being short, than shorter than the others. So the others, even when they were able to watch the game, they were still given the same opportunities, and therefore added an extra advantage compared to others. Then when we look at the equity side, so you have a consideration of fairness and justice, such that the person who is more advantaged or worse off, in this case, is given extra advantage. You can refer this to some of, for instance, affirmative action also. So the person who already has the opportunity, already has the advantage to watch, does not necessarily require support. So this is the whole picture, that the outcome indeed would be equity, that everyone can be able to watch the game as they wish to, compared to equality, where all are given support but others would not be able to achieve the goal. So this is the whole idea about equity versus equality. So if we're talking about equity focus, then evaluation should not just look at groups of individuals, that yeah, we are evaluating men, women, and so on. No, it's not just about that. It's just about also making sure that there are the advantage or prioritization is given to the worst of groups, who are mostly poor or marginalized also, because they do not have that power or other leverages to benefit from interventions if they are not given extra attention. So these are some of the associations of inequities, and I've talked about them as complex and contextual. And some of the inequities relate to gender discrimination, ethnic, linguistic, or minority or religious discrimination, or discrimination due to disability status, structural poverty, natural or man-made crisis or disaster that disadvantage others, more geographical isolation, depending, it could be, for instance, urban slums or rural areas, cultural and social norms, or weak governance, etc. So all these can lead to a complex range of political, social, or economic related inequities that the evaluators must now put in consideration when they are designing their evaluation methodologies and designs. So the question there is, then, does equity matter? Why then should evaluators be concerned about equity in their evaluation? Yes, of course it matters, because it matters when we are designing or doing the actual evaluation. The big question should be, who should we focus on or involve? Yes, in most cases, yes, you'll have, in some cases, you'll have where such considerations are not put forward, that the evaluation focuses on just general group, therefore generalizing the context of everyone in within who is participating in the intervention. But also there's scenarios where the evaluation is, yes, saying we have involved men and women in our evaluation, or also, but then the extra prioritization should be that we are more focused on also the worst of group, comparing to those who are at an advantage. Not saying that those that are an advantage should be eliminated from evaluation, but the idea here is that while designing or implementing evaluation, the considerations or prioritization should be on those who are worse off, because at the end of the day, most interventions are targeting to uplift those particular groups. Okay, so equity in this case equals counting diverse realities, because if we are saying that evaluation, if you remember, if you can recall, in our first session here, we talked about development process as complex, as power laden, and contextual. So therefore, while we are evaluating, we are trying to find out realities of different within different contexts. So there's no way, if we want to get the overall picture of different realities, okay, in this case, okay, whose reality counts or whose value count, then every individual matters in this case, as long as they are part of the intervention that is being evaluated. And of course, also equity matters because we would want to make sure that there is achievement of equitable intervention outcomes. Otherwise, if not, then the intervention would be implemented, and even if you have people participating, they would not, or they might not all benefit or experience the same, they might not all experience outcomes similarly. So in that case, then therefore it is better to integrate equity aspects within the evaluation processes. But of course, yeah, it does matter, because we're aiming towards socially fair, politically stable, and economically strong societies, where we have considerations of human rights, diversity, poverty reduction, democracy, and stability, as a result of having that measurement of equity, but also, of course, making sure that those worst of groups have also been captured in terms of knowing the impact of particular interventions that have been implemented. So, just a quotation from Bamberg and Segon, a judgment made of the relevance, effectiveness, efficiency, impact, and stability of policies, programs, and projects concerned with achieving equitable development results. That's what they look at as equity-focused evaluation. That while we are doing evaluation or designing them, then we should make a judgment regarding, of course, the evaluation criteria, but within those or evaluation criteria, we should look at how equitable how equitable the results of a particular development intervention are in relation to those in relation to those evaluation criteria. So it is very important that the evaluators must focus on those to ask those questions related to equity within while they are evaluating relevance, effectiveness, efficiency, impact, and sustainability. So, what does it then involve? So, equity focused evaluation involves a rigorous or systematic evaluation process considering marginalized or vulnerable groups. So, while we are applying that rigorous or systematic implementation of evaluation, so considerations of those vulnerable or marginalized groups must be important, because we also want to assess what works or what doesn't work for who under particular circumstances. It could be that the intervention is indeed working in favor well for men but not for women, or for people with special needs and versus those who are normal, or it could be working well for adults, not working for children. So those are some of the issues that we are looking at while applying equity focused evaluation. So it also looks at assessment of gaps between better off groups and worst of groups. Of course, I've already talked about that. Those that are at an advantage, who can easily access information, easily access the benefits and resources related to the interventions. And then there are those who do not have such privileges of easy access, or those who do not have power and they are therefore exploited within the process of interventions. So equity focused evaluation also looks at assessing intended and unintended outcomes. Of course, again, when equity is not considered within interventions, then there are unintended outcomes that might actually be faced more by the marginalized or vulnerable groups. So that takes us back, of course, to the context and complexity of issues. Yeah. So, of course, while the designs are always always depict an ideal, good picture of how intervention outcomes will be achieved, it is always not the reality when the intervention are implemented in different contexts. So the different contexts also involve what we've just talked about regarding the associations of the inequities within different communities or locations. So the reason, of course, why we also need we have to focus on equity focused evaluation is that, of course, we are looking at the issue of whose reality counts. Is it just for those who can access information, or those that we can easily access while evaluating, or it is about everyone who's being impacted by the intervention or not? So, so we look at views, perceptions, or meanings or interpretations of all representing equity, or meaning that it would be fair and just to listen to everyone or capture everyone's idea on how they have experienced the project in terms of participation, but in terms of also benefits that are resulting from that particular intervention. So, of course, reality, again, versions of reality between the privileged and unprivileged beneficiaries of the intervention. So, again, considering versions of reality, we are looking at considerations of inequities resulting from intersections of different positions, gender, economics, disabilities, deafness, region, location or sexual orientation, race or ethnicity. All these put particular categories at a disadvantage. So Martin says, okay, to make a transformative evaluation or transformative research about experiences of people, then we should also factor in these versions of reality to be able to get the true picture and therefore learn from it, and again be accountable regarding particular interventions. So why equity-focused evaluation? Yeah, counting realities for all groups, including vulnerable and marginalized. But also we want to produce evidence-based information which can, of course, improve the credibility, reliability, and efficacy of the evaluation information that we produce. That at the end of the day, when policymakers or managers of interventions are aiming at, for instance, scaling up, then they should be able to know what works for what particular groups under what context. Then there is, of course, yeah, considerations of context of intervention, operation, and implementation. I just talked about that in relation to scaling up or in relation to implementation processes. And of course, we just it should go beyond. Want to go beyond just traditional qualitative evaluations. Yeah, because the qualitative evaluations are looking at, yes, interpretations, meanings that people put attached to particular behaviors and so. But then going beyond means that now we are even considering realities of every other individuals. It's not just asking people. It's just about asking different categories of people to get different realities of their perceptions about intervention, implementation, and outcomes. So the whole purpose again, accountability. For purpose of accountability, yes, we want to say that each group is accounted for because they participated in an intervention. Oh, but of course, also that has to relate to the issues of funding and so on. It can also help organizational learning and improvement in terms of designing and formulation of different interventions. It can also contribute to knowledge management. It can help to produce evidence, therefore leading to evidence policy, evidence-based policy advocacy in terms of, okay, if different realities are captured or information is captured among different groups, then that draws a picture of different inequalities or iniquities experienced by different groups, and therefore policy advocacy can rely on that to champion and advocate or lobby for support in favor of such groups. But it can also lead to empowerment of vulnerable or marginalized groups, because now they can be able to share their own information or even highly participate in evaluation processes. But it can also lead to national capacity development for equity-focused M&E systems, especially, for instance, if such systems did not put into considerations of looking at different groups previously. So that could be also part for a learning process. But it's again, so it's not just about equity-focused evaluation, why it matters or why we should be concerned about it or the purpose. It's just, yes, all evaluations have particular principles, and of course M&E has principles and so on, but the principles for equity focused evaluation go beyond just principles of M&E in this case, because for under equity focused, we are looking at inclusive of vulnerable groups, not just looking at groups homogeneously. So we are considering heterogeneity in terms of evaluation and getting information that the evaluators, if they are using equity focused, then they should be careful, and they should be culturally sensitive and pay high attention to ethics regarding particular cultures. And of course, you can refer to what we talked about in session 2 regarding ethical guidelines in evaluation, but also culturally competent evaluation. So you can refer to that to get more insights on this principle. Equity-focused evaluation should also aim at using participatory and empowerment processes that therefore can give an advantage to those that are worse off. It also involves partnership and ownership in terms of course, information generation, but also in terms of owning information regarding a particular intervention. So just because, of course, now we shift to gender because the overview is on both equity focused and gender responsive. But so we've just looked at generally equity, of which gender can also come in as an aspect, but to give more emphasis on gender, since we must look at the aspect of men and women, boys and girls, then it is very important that we also bring out the gender aspect heavily, because as you will see, most recommenders will look at that it should be gender sensitive or gender responsive evaluation, but then the generalized one should be equity focused evaluation. So let's now shift our focus to gender. Of course, you'll find that some of the issues that we're talking about under gender are also related to the general equity focused process of evaluation. So why is gender important? Of course, gender equality in the current sustainable development goals that every country is aiming at to achieve regarding the agenda, the 2030 agenda. The goal number 5 of the goal sustainable development goal number 5 looks at gender, and the goal aims at looks at achieving gender equality and empowering all women and girls. Definitely, yes, as we shall see, gender is not just about women and girls, but it's about both boys and girls, women and men. But since women and girls are more disproportionately disadvantaged, then the focus here is to uplift women and girls to be equal to men and women in development processes. So it targets, of course, it has different targets, and looks at eliminating forms of discrimination against women and girls, eliminating forms of violence against all women and girls, eliminating harmful practices, looking at reducing or eliminating unpaid care and domestic work, ensuring participation and equal opportunities for leadership, and ensuring that there is sexual and reproductive health. This access to sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights, ensuring reforms to give more to give women and equal rights, and 5B looking at use of enabling technologies to promote women's empowerment, specifically, of course, ICT, and then policies and enforceable legislations that promote gender equality and empowerment of all women. So you can look at the SDG tracker for the details on each of these, but the idea here is that while we are looking at gender equality, we need to have gender equity in the background, because without gender equity, gender equality is not just is not enough. It should be beyond just equality to get to equity, just as we saw in the previous illustration regarding equity versus equality. So what is gender then? So gender is associated with being male or female, and of course male and female, that is biological, but then gender looks at the way in which a person's biology, or rather, of course, being male or female, is culturally or socially valued, and therefore that gender is socially constructed. And it's different from sex, because gender is social or contextual, therefore applies to differently. It varies differently according to different contexts or locations and so on, or cultures, versus sex, which is biological and universal. So it's socially constructed based on female or male, and it brings out those social distinctions or differences between female and males regarding roles and responsibilities. So who does reproductive roles, or who does productive roles, or who does community roles at a particular time or a particular location? Who benefits in terms of opportunities, or income, or health, and so on, and the expected behaviors in terms of who makes decisions at household level or community level and any other location, and also looks at the differences in terms of access, ownership, and control over resources. Because take an example, the fact that a woman can access land to use it to cultivate and harvest and get so, does not necessarily mean that this woman has control over resources, have control over this land. So those are the differences. But a man can have access, but again has control, and therefore own control relates to ownership, and control again relates to power relations, and those are the things that could bring about some kind of inequalities and iniquities that we're talking about. So this is for your reflection, of course, that you could ask yourself, to help you understand what the difference between gender and sex. So the question could be, what can a man do that a woman cannot do, or what can a woman do that a man cannot do? So the whole concept here is about English, can. Okay. So the can versus may. So what may a man do and a woman may not do, or what may a woman do that a man may not do. So this reflects on sex. The can reflects on sex, or being female or male, and of course, for instance, a woman can get pregnant, but a man cannot get pregnant or give birth. Of course, putting other factors constant, that in nowadays with artificial with technology, there are men that can be operated and then they get pregnant. But now we are now talking about the natural way of giving birth, or being a male or female. Okay, so in that case, a man cannot get pregnant, but a woman can. But when we look at gender, of course, referring to the word may. So yeah, men may also cook, and women may cook. Women may also take decisions. Men may also take decisions. So that reflects what gender is. So you could do your own reflections and think about these two ideas of what can or what may in your community, or look at your own organizations where you work and then reflect on these four questions. Yeah, so this is just a beautiful picture by Duncan Tarema, showing some of the gender roles and what women could get are involved in some communities, of course. So we have many gender related concepts, some of which we can't finish all here. There are so many, but I've attached a UNICEF glossary that has all sorts of concepts related to gender. You can take a look and get interested in some. So we shall just pick a few. So one of them is gender relations. which explain the relations of power and dominance within a particular culture. So when we talk about dominance and power, please again refer to our development process as power reading, and then you'll see that, yeah, that is captured within also gender relations, that one group or the other dominates and the other one is exploited because of these power imbalances. So, and of course, in most cases, the men have more power and dominate highly compared to women. Of course, we are not saying that women can't dominate or have power. Yeah, the context, again, context matters, because you have also women who have power and have resources, and can therefore dominate in cases of where men cannot do so. We have gender inequality, which relates also to inequities and inequalities. So these are different differences between men and women that systematically empower one group to the detriment of the other. So again, you could have interventions that are implemented, and then at the end of the day, they would benefit or empower men more than women, and yet that may have not been your intention, of course. So that could be one of the unintended outcomes of your intervention. If your intervention is benefiting more men than women, or more women than men. Okay. So that takes us to gender equality. So equal enjoyment of women and men of socially valued goods, opportunities, resources, and rewards. So in that case, we say there is no discrimination, but no discrimination does not necessarily mean there is fairness and justice. Okay, so if you have equality, that should lead you to situation of non-discrimination. But of course, that again relates to our gender equity. So gender equity relates to fairness and justice in the distribution of resources, benefits, and responsibilities in all spheres. So while the intervention aims at making sure that people have opportunities, or they participate in enjoying goods and services and rewards and resources, it should matter that based on how different certain groups, or how men and women are disadvantaged, then there must be some level of fairness and justice in terms of distribution of those goods and services. It shouldn't just be about distributing goods equally, but it should be about fair and justice distribution of those goods and services, or benefits, or responsibilities. It could be that, for instance, you have a company at workplace where you have women and men equally getting the jobs, but when it comes to payment and treatment, they are not fairly or unjust, they are not fairly and justly treated when it comes to payment. We've had companies where you have men being paid more than women, and yet they are doing the same work. So that's what we mean by those differences of fairness and justice versus just mere equality. So why does gender matter? Why does gender equality matter? Yeah, of course, the World Bank, if you take a look at it, you can have time and look at it, and it gives you some few insights of why gender equality matters in development processes. So development as a process, I just talked about this at the beginning. Development as a process of expanding, Sean Amacher defines development as a process of expanding freedoms equally for all people. So if expanding freedoms must be equally done, then for all people, then even opportunities and so on should be equally experienced. So of course, with gender equality in development, we just look at smart economics. That gender equality can be an instrument for development outcomes, because if there is gender inequality, then that means that the development outcomes are skewed to favor a particular group, which is usually, of course, men in this case. So we also look at gender equality as a matter in terms of tapping into women's skills and talents, which can be used for action for development, because women have also talents and skills that can be beneficial for development processes. Women's agency, we also want to tap into women's agency, their abilities to make choices, and of course agency for opportunities, and therefore there's that kind of intergenerational benefits, that while women can benefit also from development processes and participate in development processes, that is an incentive for the future generations to learn from, but also tap into those benefits that women have created or have also benefited from. Okay. Yeah, so if you take an example, if a woman goes to school and therefore is educated and can be able to work, and therefore the next generations or the children that they are producing could also benefit from such development outcomes that women are enjoying. So, but of course, also we want to increase women's individual and collective agency, so that we have better outcomes, institutions, and better policy choices. Because it's not just a matter of having one category of people, of group, one category of as men to be able to participate and enjoy benefits, but we also want to have a collective kind of everyone to work for better outcomes. If you take an example, let's say you have a project that is looking at better water management or better management of water sources within a community. In some communities, since men are the ones that get into making decisions, if you have a committee that is only for men, then that leaves out the experiences and realities of women who are in most cases dealing with water, because they want it to do the reproductive roles at households. So in that case, you need to have a collective kind of action, to have both men and women, girls and boys working together, and that would lead to better outcomes for such a water management project. Okay, so we also have other concepts. Gender blindness. When there is gender blindness, it means that there is failure to recognize that the roles and responsibilities of men and boys, or women and girls, are socially given, and therefore even evaluations, if evaluations do not recognize that such roles and responsibilities are culturally given, so such a failure of recognizing such outcomes of culture, then that renders evaluators or the evaluation process gender blind. But a gender focus, but also evaluation can be gender sensitive in a way that the processes and the evaluators can be aware of and address gender differences. That also brings us to the concept of gender responsive, that which has the idea of that there must be, there is intentionally employing gender considerations to affect the design, implementation, and results of programs and policies. and therefore in that case, that while we are designing evaluation processes or procedures and how we are going to implement them, and even during implementation, gender considerations should be intentionally considered within those processes. But of course, the other concept is gender analysis, which of course we can look at in during session 9 that is coming up as part of the methods of collecting data about different groups. So it's a method of identifying and classifying the distinctions between males and females, and of course looks more at what women do and men do, and also looks at whether they have equal access to resources and can control benefits equally, and so on. So gender analysis aims at establishing or assessment of those gender differences so that they can be able to examine and develop better interventions that aim at bringing equality among those two groups. So it's a critical examination of the different effects and impact of development programs on men and women, and that's what, of course, the whole data collection on evaluation would be aiming at. So that's why we are referring this to session 9, where we look at more of how of the designs and the actual evaluation process, how it is done. There is gender mainstreaming that, of course, it's as a result of gender analysis, that the data we get from gender analysis is very crucial to make sure that at the end of the day, the decision makers, the policy makers or decision makers or managers of particular interventions or evaluators themselves should be able to create a strategy of making sure that women's and men's concerns and experiences are integral part of the designing, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of policies and programs. Of course, in all different sectors or spheres, so that men and women can benefit equally, and inequality is not perpetuated in that case. So gender mainstreaming in simple terms is having that integrating those gender aspects of men and women to be able to bring about equality. So that shows us the idea that we can also look at development from a gender perspective, that we examine impacts we examine or evaluate, if you will, the impact of projects in terms of who benefits, who loses, what trade-offs have been made, what is the resulting balance of rights and obligations between men and women, what is the resulting balance of power and privileges between men and women, and of course between other social groups. So that idea of looking at development while recognizing that every policy, program, and project affects men and women and differently, and therefore while we are checking how our interventions are doing in terms of outcomes, it is therefore essential and very powerful that we recognize that we must also tap into these different realities or experiences of men and women, or girls and boys, so that we can be able to look at how they've been able to benefit from the projects. So why does it matter? Yeah, gender versus human rights, it's just common sense. Of course, if we look at gender, then we are also looking at human rights, rights of men, boys, women, and girls, in general, just the way we have talked about earlier in terms of equity, that every individual or all persons, regardless of their disabilities or their race or their ethnicity, they deserve equal treatment or equal opportunities. So it's the same as when we talk about gender. Of course, also gender affects development outcomes, but also development outcomes affect gender. That if women are not benefiting from the equally from the interventions, then that has an effect on the outcomes of development. That if, for instance, you do cash transfers to a household, if you factor in the idea that men have more power to control such cash such cash transfers, then even development outcomes would be that women would not benefit equally because they are at a disadvantage, that they cannot control or have influence the decisions that would be made on such cash transfers at households. If we talk about gender, we're also looking at representation issues, that are women and men equally represented in our intervention processes or evaluation processes. There is also gender relation. If, for instance, we refer to what we talked about development process as power laden, that while we're talking about gender relations, we are looking at power and dominance between men and women, and therefore that power differences between men and women may also lead to having development interventions or evaluation processes that are dominated by men because of their power leverage that they have. Then there is also gender context and complexity in development, that we talked about development as a complex process, and therefore one of the contexts that lead to complexity of development or development outcomes is gender itself. Yeah, so you could also visit Conwell 2007 as looks at the gender agenda in this case. So if we've talked about equity focused evaluation, and therefore this advocacy for gender responsive evaluation, and the UN Women 2015 defines it as a systematic and impartial assessment that provides credible and reliable evidence-based information about the extent to which an intervention has resulted in progress, of course, or the lack of thereof, towards intended or unintended results regarding gender equality and the empowerment of women. So in that case, in simple terms, looking at that systematic and impartial evaluation that considers whether particular development interventions have created outcomes that are leading to equality but also empowerment of women. So again, gender sensitive evaluation defined by Sharon Brisora, that it's an approach to evaluation that pays specific and sustained attention to gender needs and interests and cultural specific dynamics, of course, recognizing those disparities between men and women, and therefore making sure that while where evaluation is done, it puts into considerations of concerns of men and women, boys and girls. So in that case, it would be responsive to the fact that those disparities are contextual and therefore socially constructed, not just within households or at community level, but also at workplace, within organizations, but also within institutions, but also within our development interventions. It's not just about community, but it's also about the different contexts, as I have said. So in that case, evaluation should be sensitive to those differences or disparities, and therefore be able to respond to them, to make sure that everyone has an advantage in and attaining opportunities to participate, but also to benefit from interventions. Of course, for purposes of what we're looking at in terms of learning and accountability and so on. So again, looks at integrating dimensions of gender and women rights and needs into evaluation approaches and methods. So it's not just about doing evaluation generally or homogeneously, but it's also about making sure that women's issues or girls or boys or men's issues are an integral part in the evaluation designing, in the evaluation approaches, or in the evaluation theories, in the evaluation methods, in the evaluation conduct, but also in evaluation information use. And we are going to look at how all these can be factored in. So it's about gender responsive evaluation is about doing evaluation with a gender lens. So viewing what is being evaluated through a gender lens, of course, factoring in men and women, boys and girls, and again consistently and specifically ensuring that the needs, realities, and issues of men and women or boys and girls are considered within each stage of evaluation, right from preparation and planning, through designing the methods, and through collection of data and analysis, and then to how evaluation reports or information is recorded. Because if such, of course, again, if such evaluation is not information is not disseminated, then it's of no use. Okay. So why integrate gender in evaluation? Of course, for proper analysis of how gender issues affect development processes, but also how development processes are affecting gender issues in terms of transforming them to achieve equality and empowerment of women. We integrate gender into evaluation also to improve the quality of evaluation, because the quality and credibility depends on whether we have been able to capture the different realities and experiences of everyone who has been able to participate in the project or intervention and who has been able to benefit or not. We also integrate gender in evaluation to ensure that evaluations are more context appropriate and inclusive, because if they are not inclusive, then there are missing gaps in the information that is generated, and therefore the information might not be entirely useful for particular people in different positions. Of course, we do that to gain more knowledge of what works for whom and under what under what circumstances, to be able to create gender transformative societies. Because in that case, if we know what particular outcomes or development processes work for who and under what circumstances, then we should be able to design better interventions and policies that would therefore lead to gender transformative societies. We also do gender in evaluation to enhance equality, but also empowerment of women and girls. And just as we saw earlier, that is the main goal for the Sustainable Development Goal number 5. That's the main goal in that case. So doing evaluation with a gender lens would therefore help in towards achieving that Sustainable Development Goal 5. Of course, there are principles that must be followed when integrating gender into evaluation, and you could find some of these in details under UNICEF 2019 and UN Women 2015. That gender integrated evaluation should be transformative, and therefore in that case leading to a particular gender based kind of development processes. It should also be participatory and inclusive, and therefore leading to the inclusion of both men and women, boys and girls in the evaluation processes. Should be innovative, intentional, and therefore leading to the usefulness of such information. Should of course possess some high level of quality and credibility, but most importantly, application of ethics. That while such gender integrated evaluations are being done, there it should put into consideration ethics. Ethics again refer to our session 2, where we look at the ethical guidelines, including accountability, integrity, beneficence, respect for culture, and so on. That gender integrated evaluation should also rely on the principle of transparency, independence, and impartiality, fair power relations, and empowerment. Now, fair power relations and empowerment should not only look at the beneficiaries, but we should also look at the power that is possessed by the evaluators, because evaluators are looked at by the community members as people who are powerful. So such power relations between evaluators and community members could also lead to some problems in terms of generation of information within evaluation. So that should also be reflected on while integrating gender, while integrating gender into evaluation. Then there is also partnership, ownership, and leadership at all levels, and then institutional coordination and coherence with regard to gender equality and empowerment of women and girls. So consideration of all of gender at all stages of evaluation is very important, because it shouldn't just be at designs, it should be also at when such evaluations are being carried out. So from planning all through to preparation, and then to collecting data and reporting information. So the UN, UNICEF gives us some example which is illustrated, that for instance, considerations, different levels of how evaluation considerations might or might not apply a gender lens during data collection. So this one, the illustration is just looking at data collection phase only, but we are saying that all other evaluation processes should be able to consider gender issues. So this is just an example regarding application of gender during data collection. So you have an example of where evaluation does not evaluation is discriminates gender. So in other words, it does not consider anything to do with gender. So in that case, favors either boys or men, or women and girls, depending on gender inequalities. And an example here is that, for instance, one could have focus group discussions during evaluation that exclude females, assuming that only males can exercise decisions related to households, communities. That's an assumption. So in that case, there is discrimination of one group or the other, and consideration of the other. Then you have evaluations that are data collection process of evaluation that are gender blind. Those data collection method or processes that ignore gender in evaluation design, and therefore perpetuate the status quo or worsens inequalities. And an example is that, for instance, you have a focus group discussion as a data collection method during evaluation that brings all community members together in one space. Of course, this could put diverse groups or women and girls, boys at risk. Take an example, an evaluation on a project that looks at reducing domestic violence or gender-based violence. So in such a focus group discussion, if you combine both men and women, there could be a risk that while such evaluation is happening, or after the evaluation has happened, it is risking the victims of of such gender-based violence or domestic violence that, for instance, after such discussions, when community members go home, then there could be some harm that is going to happen to particular individuals because you have combined both groups that are having experiences. You never know, you could have combined the perpetrators and the victims within the same group, and now you can imagine the results. You also have data collection methods that are gender aware and sensitive. Therefore, acknowledge gender inequalities. So we are talking about this. Acknowledge gender inequalities, but does not, of course, robustly address them. So in that case, for instance, you have an example of a gender separated focus group that happen simultaneously and ask the same questions but do not further probe for gender differentiated experiences. So there you are gender aware, you have combined both men and women in a group. You have men in a separate focus group, but you have also women in a separate group, but you just ask general questions that do not reflect or bring out in-depth information regarding the differences between both groups. So in that case, yes, you are gender aware and gender sensitive. You have done both groups for women and groups for men, but you do not go ahead to tackle the actual differences between both groups. So while we are moving from gender discriminatory data collection methods or procedures, we are moving towards gender transformative or gender responsive ways of collecting data to include gender lens within our evaluation processes. So you also have gender responsive data collection procedures for evaluation. So data collection methods that are gender responsive identify and address different needs of girls, boys, and women and men to promote equal opportunities or equal outcomes. So in this case, an example could be that gender and age separated focus groups happen at time best suited for each group. So questions are tailored to surface any gender differences and experiences, but also childcare or transportation are offered to everyone. And therefore, in that case, if, for instance, women did not have a transport to get to the center where such evaluation discussions are happening, then you can offer opportunities of transport to everyone, because some groups are at a disadvantage. Could be girls or women, while men own bicycles and so on. But also timing matters. For instance, you want to hold an evaluation group exercise to collect data. If you do it in the morning, then you are favoring particular group while neglecting the other. Or for instance, if you do it at a trading center, it could be that or at a particular time during lunchtime at a trading center, it could be that you'd only be able to access men while women are not available because they are in their households preparing different activities or doing different household chores. So that would be not be gender responsive. So to be gender responsive, in this case, you integrate gender differences in terms of considerations of time or how the focus group discussions are done, or the benefits of such evaluation processes. But you could also, the best one, you could do a gender transformative process or data collection process where you explicitly seek to redress gender inequalities and empower the disadvantaged population. So in this case, for example, you could have the same gender responsive plus intersectionality of gender and other identities taken into account. Of course, and composition of the focus group and guiding questions are designed after consultation with an evaluation reference group with an understanding of the gender context in the community. And therefore, in this case, you are not just only looking at women, but you're also looking at different categories of women. Or you're not looking at men, but you're also looking at different categorization of men. So rather than generalizing men and women, you are also distinctively focusing on maybe women with HIV, or women with disability, or women who are single mothers, or women who are coming from 35 kilometers to where you are, or women who are into agriculture, or women who are doing business. So although that is the different intersectionality we're talking about. Or you could look at women who are of color, or of a different ethnic group, or women who are refugees, or women who are in host communities. So all that is different categorization of inequalities, because you want to look at how you can heterogeneously address those differences, rather than looking at, again, women as women. Yes, you are looking at groups of men and women, but you should be able to go ahead and also recategorize subgroups of such individuals. So in other words, we are saying that gender responsive is a good practice indeed, but you could do best if you do a gender transformative kind of data collection process for evaluation. So again, equality versus equity and justice. So the assumption under equality is that everyone benefits from the same supports, and this is equal treatment. But equal treatment does not mean that everyone would equally benefit. So in that case, you imply strategies of equity. So in reference again to equity focused evaluation, that everyone gets the supports they need. This is the concept of affirmative action, and therefore producing equality. But to do more justice and to be more fair, it's better to review the strategies, but also trying to eliminate the barriers. Removing barriers sustains the development outcomes. But if you just support and give opportunities, but without removing the barriers, so you can look at this barrier and the wall, so which is different from this fence, which is visible, so everyone can view, and you do not have to provide support. So instead of continuous support or continuous provision of supports, which is not sustainable, considering again the fact that resources are always scarce, it's better that you use those resources to remove barriers, and therefore the opportunities and outcomes experienced by everyone are sustained. So all three can see the game without support or accommodations, because the causes of the inequities were addressed. And this also applies in evaluation processes. So refer back to the principles that we talked about. Bottom line is that if contexts and complexity of development processes must be captured for evidence-based changes or reforms, then the necessity of gender responsive and equity focused evaluations can not be wavered, or in other words, they are inevitable. Okay, so here you have your reading resources that you can benefit from. So that marks the end of the session. Thank you.